The sun dipped low over the endless plains, washing the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. Dust rolled across the open fields as a lone rider appeared, his hat pulled low, his shoulders bent against the wind. That rider was Ethan Cole, a cowboy who had long ago chosen silence over company. His days were quiet, marked by the creak of leather saddles, the neigh of restless horses, and the wind sweeping over his small ranch. Ethan lived alone. Not because he wanted to, but because life had taken from him the things that once made him whole. Years back, he had known laughter. He had known love. A wife, a dream of children, and the warmth of family dinners once filled his home. But tragedy struck. His young wife was taken by fever, and with her went his hope for family. After that, Ethan built fences not only around his land but also around his heart. Neighbors called him the Ghost Rider, a man who showed up in town only when supplies ran dry. Folks respected him but kept their distance. He never raised. His voice never picked fights, but he never shared a drink or a smile either. Some whispered that he was cursed, others said he had simply given up. But Ethan wasn't a cruel man. He was just tired. Tired of loss. Tired of remembering. Tired of empty nights filled with silence too loud to bear. On this particular evening, Ethan rode back from town with a sack of flour, coffee beans, and a few supplies tied to his saddle. The dirt road stretched endlessly before him, the sound of his horse's hooves echoing like a steady heartbeat. The town had been its usual self, bustling, noisy, alive with faces that didn't look his way for long. He preferred it that way. When he reached his ranch, he slid off his horse and untied the supplies. His cabin stood against the fading light, weathered but sturdy, much like the man himself. He pushed open the door, the creak echoing in the emptiness inside. A pot hung over cold ashes in the fireplace, a single chair, a table scarred with years of use, and a bed that looked too big for one man. Ethan moved through the motions of his evening, feeding the horses, stacking wood by the fire, and finally sitting at the table with a tin cup of black coffee. Outside, coyotes howled into the night, but inside, silence pressed heavy against his chest. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams, and muttered to himself, "Maybe this is all there is." Yet deep inside, a part of him longed for something more. He wouldn't admit it, but he dreamed of voices in the house again, of laughter, of life. Dreams he believed were buried with his past. What he didn't know was that destiny had other plans, and soon, a little girl's voice would shatter the silence he had carried for years. The morning sun crept over the plains, casting long shadows across Ethan Cole's ranch. He had barely finished his chores when he realized he was running low, on feed and medicine for his horses. With a resigned sigh, he saddled up again and made his way toward town. The ride was quiet, the same endless stretch of dust and prairie grass, but Ethan felt a strange unease he couldn't place. Maybe it was just another day of facing the noise and chatter of people he no longer understood. By mid-morning, he reached the town, a modest settlement with a single main street lined by a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a church that rang its bell every Sunday. Children darted about in the dirt road while merchants shouted their wares to passers-by. Ethan dismounted, tied his horse, and headed toward the store, keeping his hat low, as he always did. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco and grain. He picked up what he needed without a word: sugar, salt, and some spare cartridges. As he stepped outside, a tug at his sleeve stopped him cold. He turned, expecting to see some boy playing tricks, but instead his eyes fell upon a small girl, no more than 10 years old. Her dress was worn thin, patched in too many places to count, and her hair hung loose in tangled strands. In her arms, she clutched a baby swaddled in a blanket that looked more like a rag. The child's tiny cries were muffled against her chest. The girl's big, weary eyes looked up at him with a seriousness no child should carry. Her voice, fragile but steady, broke the noise of the street. "Can you buy us, mister?" Ethan froze. For a moment he thought he hadn't heard right. Around them, townsfolk slowed their steps, curiosity flickering across their faces. Whispers started. People always fed on gossip. The cowboy cleared his throat, trying to push down the knot forming there. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low. The girl adjusted the baby in her arms as though shielding him. "Buy us, me and my brother." Her words trembled now, but her eyes did not leave his. "We don't got nobody. Mama says." She trailed off, glancing over her shoulder. Following her gaze, Ethan spotted a woman standing a few paces away, leaning weakly against a post near the saloon. She looked young, mid-20s at most, but hardship had carved years into her face. Her skin was pale, her frame frail as though she hadn't eaten in days. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her boots barely clung to her feet. When their eyes met, the woman quickly looked away, shame burning across her cheeks. The murmurs around them grew louder. Some laughed under their breath, others shook their heads. One man muttered, "Another drifter woman selling what she can." Another spat on the ground, calling it disgraceful. Ethan ignored them all. He crouched down so he was eye level with the girl. His voice softened. "Why would you say a thing like that?" Her lip quivered, but she held her ground. "'Cause we're hungry, and Mama says no one helps for free. But maybe you could. You look like you got land, mister. A place." She hugged the baby tighter, who let out a weak whimper. "He needs milk." Ethan felt something shift inside him, an ache he hadn't felt in years. He glanced again at the mother. She stood rooted in place, clutching her shawl, her eyes glistening but full of defeat. Slowly, Ethan stood and walked toward her. The crowd parted, their whispers chasing him. He stopped a foot away, studying her with a calm that hid his turmoil. "Is this true?" he asked. The woman swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't tell her to say that, mister. She's just a child, but it's true, we got nowhere, no food, no home, he's gone." She blinked back tears, her jaw tightening. "I ain't asking for charity, I don't know where else to turn." For the first time in years, Ethan felt words slip past the defenses he'd built around himself. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Clara, and these are my children, Anna and Jacob." Ethan looked from the baby to the girl to the mother. Something inside him stirred, a memory of what he once had and what was taken from him. The silence in his home suddenly seemed heavier than ever. He adjusted his hat, drawing a long breath. This wasn't what he came for, he didn't ask for this. And yet destiny had found him, right in the middle of a dusty street. The girl tugged his sleeve again, her eyes pleading. "Please, mister, don't leave us." Ethan stood there, torn between the solitude he knew and the chance, dangerous, uncertain, but real, that life was giving him once more. The street had grown quiet around them, though Ethan could still feel the weight of a dozen curious eyes. He didn't like being the center of attention. He never had. Yet here he stood, with a little girl clutching his sleeve, a baby whimpering in her arms, and a young woman staring at the ground like it might swallow her whole. Ethan glanced around at the townsfolk. Their stares weren't kind. Some were mocking, some pitying, and most simply curious, waiting to see what the lonely cowboy would do. He didn't owe them a show, and he didn't owe this woman anything either. At least, that's what he told himself. Still, the plea in the girl's eyes was harder to ignore than the whispers around him. He tipped his hat toward the woman. "Come inside," he muttered, jerking his head toward the general store. "We'll talk there." Clara hesitated, her hand tightening on her shawl, but after a moment she nodded. Ethan guided them inside, shielding them from the gawking crowd. The storekeeper, a kindly old man named Harris, raised his brows as Ethan led the trio to a quiet corner. "You all right there, Cole?" he asked. "Fine," Ethan replied curtly. He didn't care to explain. They sat at a small wooden bench near the back. Anna climbed up carefully with the baby in her lap, rocking him instinctively, while Clara lowered herself opposite Ethan. For the first time he got a good look at her, sunken, cheeks, tired eyes, and hands blistered from work that had yielded nothing. He waited. Years of ranch life had taught him the value of silence, and he wasn't about to press her. Eventually, she spoke. "We had a farm. Clara began, her voice low, each word scraped raw. Not much, but enough. My husband, Daniel, he wasn't a bad man, not always. He worked the fields when he could, but he drank more than he should. Said the land cursed him, said God cursed him. When the drought came, he gave up. She swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her lap. One night he just left. Said he'd find work, send money. Months passed. Nothing. Then folks started whispering. He'd been seen in another town drunk and living with some woman. He never came back. Anna's small voice broke in, whispery but firm. He's not coming back, Mama. Clara's lips trembled, but she kept her composure. I tried, mister. I went to neighbors, to the church. Folks have their own mouths to feed. Nobody wanted a woman with 2 children, not when she can't offer much in return. I scrubbed floors, mended clothes, took whatever work I could. But it ain't enough. And the children. Her eyes darted to Anna, then to the bundle in her arms. They deserve better than starving. Ethan leaned back, his arms folded across his chest. He felt a flicker of anger, not at her, but at the man who had abandoned them. He knew the type. Men who took the easy way, men who left others to suffer. The little girl clutched her baby, brother tighter, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought, maybe if somebody bought us, we'd be worth something. Mama says nothing comes free, so... She trailed off, shame coloring her cheeks. Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd seen a lot in his years, but he'd never heard a child speak like that. No child should have to. You ain't for sale, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. His eyes softened as he looked at Anna. Not you, not your brother, not your mama. Clara's eyes widened as if she hadn't expected such words. She blinked quickly, fighting tears. I didn't mean for her to say that, mister. I swear, I'd never... I know, Ethan interrupted quietly. I believe you. For a moment, the only sound was the baby's soft whimpering. Ethan studied them, 3 souls bound by desperation, standing on the edge of survival. Something inside him stirred again, that same ache from before. He remembered nights spent staring at an empty chair across the table, wishing for voices to fill the silence. Harris, the storekeeper, shuffled over with a small tin of milk powder and set it on the table. On the house, he said gently, giving Clara a sympathetic nod before retreating. Clara's shoulders sagged as though the weight she carried had finally broken her. She buried her face in her hands, silent sobs shaking her frame. Anna leaned against her, whispering, It's okay, Mama. It's okay. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening, his fingers drumming on the table. He wasn't a man who invited others into his life. He had locked that door long ago. But sitting here, watching this fragile woman crumble and her children cling to hope, he felt that door rattle on its hinges. He sighed deeply, muttering to himself, Lord, what am I supposed to do with this? Outside, the sun had shifted, and with it, Ethan sensed his life was about to shift too. Ethan Cole wasn't a man easily shaken. He had weathered storms on the open plains, faced outlaws with nothing but a steady hand and a cold stare, and survived loss that would have broken lesser men. Yet here he was, sitting across from a woman and her children, and for the first time in years he didn't know what to do. Clara wiped her face, embarrassed by the tears that had slipped through her defenses. She pulled Anna close, adjusting, the baby in her lap as though trying to shield them both from the weight of pity. Ethan saw pride in her. Battered though it was, it still clung to her like the last thread holding her together. He admired that, but it didn't make the choice before him any easier. The store had grown quieter. The curious had drifted away, but not without leaving behind their judgments. Ethan could almost hear their whispers echoing in his head. Why should he take them in? What's a loner like Cole gonna do with a woman and 2 kids? Ain't his problem. Walk away, cowboy. And truth be told, maybe they were right. His life wasn't made for children. His ranch was a place of labor and silence. He knew how to mend fences and break horses, not how to raise little ones or soothe a baby's cry at midnight. And a woman? He hadn't let a woman close since his wife's passing. The thought of opening that wound again, of caring, of hoping, only to lose, gnawed at his insides. Ethan pushed back his chair and stood pacing a slow line across the wooden floor. His boots thudded softly, each step echoing his unease. Clara watched him carefully, her eyes darting between fear and fragile hope. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I ain't got much to offer, just a patch of land, a roof that leaks in the spring, and more silence than most folks can stand. I don't know the first thing about raising children, and I don't take kindly to people depending on me." Anna's small voice broke through, trembling but certain. "We won't be trouble, mister. I can help with chores, I can cook, and I can take care of Jacob. Mama says I'm strong." Ethan stopped pacing, staring at her. Her eyes reminded him of his own when he was a boy, tired but stubborn, refusing to give in. Something in him cracked. He turned away quickly, muttering, "It ain't that simple." Clara spoke next, her tone quiet but steady. "I'm not asking you to carry our burdens, mister, just a chance to earn our keep, to work for a roof over our heads. I'd scrub floors till my hands bleed so long as my children don't go hungry. If you turn us away—" Her voice faltered, but she forced the words out. "Then I don't know where else to go." The baby whimpered again, a weak sound that pierced through Ethan's chest like a blade. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of memories pressing down. His wife's laughter, the cradle they never got to use, the long nights of emptiness that followed. He had promised himself he would never open that door again. That it was safer to live alone with no one left to lose. But looking at Clara and her children, he realized loneliness had been killing him slowly all along. Still, fear gnawed at him. Fear of failing them. Fear of caring too much. Only to have life. "Rip it away again, Cowboy?" Harris's voice interrupted his storm of thoughts. The storekeeper had been watching quietly from the counter, his eyes kind but firm. "Sometimes the Lord don't give you what you want. He gives you what you need. And sometimes He gives you people who need you." Ethan turned, meeting the old man's steady gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Harris looked away, busying himself with stacking jars, leaving the weight of his words to linger. Ethan exhaled slowly, his chest tight. He looked once more at the fragile family before him. Clara clutching her shawl, Anna trying to look brave, the baby drifting into restless sleep. The choice pressed down heavy. He could walk out now, ride back to his ranch, and let silence rule his days again. Or he could do the unthinkable. Let them in. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole was standing at a crossroads, and whichever path he chose would change his life forever. The ride back to Ethan Cole's ranch was quiet, save for the steady creak of saddles and the occasional cry from baby Jacob. Clara sat stiffly behind Ethan on his horse, clutching the child close, while Anna rode perched on a borrowed pony the storekeeper had lent them. Ethan had made the decision almost without realizing it. One moment he had been standing in that dusty store, torn between past and present. The next he had told Clara, "You'll come with me." The words had felt foreign on his tongue, but once spoken there was no taking them back. Now, with the town fading into the distance and the wide-open plain stretching before them, the weight of his choice pressed hard on his shoulders. He was no savior, no family man. He was just Ethan Cole, a cowboy who lived in silence. What could he possibly offer them? Still, when he glanced back and saw Anna's small figure bouncing awkwardly on the pony, determination on her face despite her inexperience, he felt something stir deep inside. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was slipping low, casting long golden rays across the weathered cabin and the corral beyond. The horses snorted as Ethan dismounted. Clara followed, awkward with the baby in her arms, her eyes scanning the place with a mix of caution and relief. "It ain't much," Ethan said gruffly, pulling the supplies from his saddle. "But it's solid. Roof don't leak too bad in. The winter and the well's good water." Clara gave a faint smile, the kind that tried to hide gratitude. "It's more than we had yesterday." Anna slid down from the pony, her eyes wide as she took in the spread. The corral, the barn, the fields stretching beyond. It all looked endless to her. She rushed to the fence, peering at the horses with awe. "Mama, look! They're beautiful." Clara hushed her gently, but Ethan caught the flicker of joy in the girl's eyes. It had been a long time since a child's laughter rang across this land. Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather. Clara laid Jacob carefully on the bed while Ethan busied himself at the hearth, stirring up the ashes and setting kindling to flame. He moved with the ease of habit, though he couldn't ignore how strange it felt having others in the space that had been his alone for so long. Clara set about quietly, tidying as though instinct drove her. She gathered dishes stacked on the table, swept dust from the floor, and even found a threadbare cloth to wipe the counter. Ethan watched from the corner of his eye. There was no hesitation in her movements. She wasn't a guest waiting to be served. She was a woman desperate to make herself useful. "You don't need to do that," Ethan muttered. Clara looked up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I need to. It helps me feel like I belong." Ethan had no answer for that. Anna, meanwhile, had already claimed a spot near the hearth, humming softly to her brother as she rocked him. Ethan caught himself staring at the way her small hands cared for the infant, at the way Clara moved with quiet determination, at the way the cabin seemed less hollow with them inside. Dinner was simple. Beans and bread Clara baked from the flour Ethan had bought, with coffee strong enough to chase the chill. For the first time in years, Ethan ate at a table that wasn't silent. Anna chattered about how she'd help with chores, how she wanted to learn to ride properly, and how Jacob would grow strong on the ranch. Clara hushed her, but Ethan only nodded, hiding the small tug at his lips that almost became a smile. For years the night had been nothing but silence, but now from inside he heard a baby's soft cry, a mother's gentle hush, and a child's sleepy murmur. Life had returned to his home. Ethan closed his eyes, wrestling with the storm in his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether he was strong enough, patient enough, or worthy enough. But one thing was certain: he was no longer alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something he'd thought he'd lost forever. The days that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet adjustments. Clara rose before dawn to fetch water, bake bread, and help Ethan tend to the livestock. Anna followed at his heels, eager to learn everything from brushing down horses to mending fences, while Jacob's cries punctuated the rhythm of each day, like a reminder that life had found its way back into the ranch. For a while it almost felt natural, almost. But peace in a small town never lasted long. Whispers had already spread since that day in the store. Whispers about the lonely cowboy who had brought home a woman and her 2 children. Some thought it strange, others scandalous. And a few, bitter as old coffee, decided to voice their opinions. It started when Ethan rode into town for supplies a week later. He tied his horse outside the blacksmith's and felt the stairs before he even stepped onto the boardwalk. 2 ranch hands leaned against a post, grinning like hyenas. "Cole," one drawled, "heard you finally found yourself a woman. Didn't figure you for the type to take in strays." His friend chuckled. "Reckon she's working off her stay?" Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't give them the satisfaction of a reply, just pushed past them toward the general store, but the words lingered like burrs under his skin. Inside, Harris greeted him kindly as always, but even he couldn't hide concern. "Folks don't mean nothing by it, Ethan. They just don't understand." Ethan muttered, "Ain't their business?" Yet, part of him knew it was their business. In small towns, everyone's life became fodder for judgment. And though Clara did her best to stay out of sight, he knew she felt the sting of those whispers too. That night, as the lantern flickered in the cabin, Clara sat quietly at the table, her hands folded in her lap. Anna had gone to bed, Jacob asleep beside her, but Clara's eyes were restless. "They're talking about us, aren't they?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared at the fire, chewing over the words. Finally, he said, "People always talk. Nothing we can do about it." Clara's lips pressed tight. I don't want to bring shame to your name. If it's easier, we can leave. We've survived worse. Something in Ethan snapped at that. He turned, his eyes fierce. You ain't leaving. Clara blinked, startled. Ethan softened, lowering his voice. This is your home now. Don't matter what anyone says. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, the weight she carried seemed to ease. But the trials didn't stop at gossip. 2 weeks later, as Ethan worked the corral, a rider approached. Dust trailed behind the horse, and as the man drew near, Ethan felt his gut tighten. The rider dismounted, swaying slightly, the smell of whiskey heavy on him. His clothes were torn, his boots scuffed, and his eyes burned with a mix of bitterness and bravado. Name's Daniel, the man slurred. And I hear you got something that belongs to me. Ethan's blood ran cold. He didn't need the name to know who this was. Clara's husband. The man spat in the dirt. My wife, my kids. You think you can just take them? From the porch, Clara appeared, clutching Jacob to her chest, Anna peeking fearfully from behind her skirts. Her face drained of color as she whispered, Daniel. The drunkard smirked at her. Miss me, darling? Ethan stepped forward, his stance steady, voice like steel. They're not yours anymore. You left 'em to starve. Daniel sneered. Still my blood, and I'll take 'em back one way or another. Clara's voice trembled as she cried out, No, we don't want you. Stay away from us. Daniel's face twisted with rage, but before he could move closer, Ethan's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. His eyes locked on the man's, cold and unwavering. You ride out now, Ethan said, his tone deadly calm. You come back here again, you won't ride out at all. For a tense moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Daniel's drunken bravado faltered beneath Ethan's glare. He spat once more, then staggered back to his horse, mounting clumsily. This ain't over, he muttered, before riding off into the night. When the dust settled, Clara sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Anna rushed to her side while Ethan stood guard on the porch, his revolver still heavy in his grip. The challenges he had feared, the whispers, the ridicule, the ghosts of Clara's past, had arrived faster than he expected. And deep down, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The night after Daniel's return stretched long and restless. Ethan sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. Inside, Clara kept close to her children, though even through the cabin walls Ethan could hear her quiet sobs when she thought no one was listening. For years, Ethan had lived in silence. But now the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was fragile, filled with the weight of lives depending on him. And he swore, as the stars wheeled overhead, that no harm would come to them, so long as he drew breath. The following days passed in uneasy peace. Clara worked the homestead with renewed determination, cooking, cleaning, tending the small garden patch behind the cabin. Anna followed Ethan everywhere, learning how to rope, ride, and haul water, her laughter starting to echo across the land like music. Even little Jacob seemed stronger, his cries sharper, his tiny hands clutching at life with stubborn resolve. Yet the shadow of Daniel lingered. The townsfolk whispered louder now, some warning Ethan to cut ties, others mocking him for playing house. But Ethan didn't waver. He had made his choice the day he brought them home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned red, the shadow finally returned. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, Daniel, flanked by two rough-looking men, both armed. They rode straight to the ranch, kicking up dust, their horses snorting with impatience. Ethan stepped out from the barn, his revolver holstered at his side, his stance calm but unyielding. Clara hurried to the porch, clutching Jacob, Anna gripping, her skirts with wide eyes. Daniel swung down from his horse, swagger in his step and malice in his grin. Told you, Cole, this ain't over. I've come to take back what's mine. Ethan's voice was steady as stone. You had your chance, Daniel. You abandoned them. They don't want you. Daniel sneered, looking past Ethan to Clara. Woman, you tell him. You're my wife. You come with me now, or I'll take you by force. Clara's body trembled, but her voice, when it came, was stronger than she expected. You're no husband of mine. You left us to die. My children and I, we belong here now. Daniel's face twisted with rage. He reached for his gun, but before steel cleared leather, Ethan's revolver was drawn, aimed steady at the man's chest. You're not taking one more step, Ethan growled. You lay a hand on them and you'll answer to me. The standoff stretched, dust swirling between them, tension thick as rope about to snap. Daniel's companions shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering under Ethan's deadly calm. Finally, one spat on the ground. Ain't worth it, Daniel. Let's ride. But Daniel, stubborn and drunk with pride, sneered. Cowboy thinks he's some kind of savior. Fine. Keep her. Keep the brats. See how long you last with that burden. He mounted his horse, snarled one last curse, and rode off into the dusk, his men trailing behind. When the dust settled, Ethan holstered his gun and turned toward the porch. Clara stood there, tears streaming down her face, not of fear but of relief. Anna ran forward, throwing her arms around Ethan's waist. Thank you, mister, she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan placed a hand gently on her head, his throat tight. For the first time in years, he felt something warm breaking through the cold walls he had built around his heart. That night, as the family gathered around the small table, Clara spoke softly. We don't know how to repay you. Ethan looked at her, then at the children, then back again. His voice was rough, but steady. Don't need repayment, you're here now, that's enough. The cabin, once a tomb of silence, now hummed with life. Anna's laughter filled the rafters. Jacob's cries echoed like a promise of the future. Clara's soft singing at the hearth carried warmth into the cold corners of the room, and Ethan, the lonely cowboy who had sworn never to love again, found himself sitting on the porch one last time, staring at the stars with something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He wasn't alone anymore. The girl who once asked, "Can you buy us, mister?" had unknowingly bought him too, bought him a second chance at life, at family, at hope. And for Ethan Cole, that was worth more than all the land, cattle, or gold in the world.